Okay, so I'm just now realizing that in this video, I talk about the most important lessons that I've ever learned, and I didn't talk about getting rid of the attachment to the outcome of something that you're doing. I can't believe I didn't mention that. I talked about cautiousness and patience, but somehow the big like defining thing that makes all of those things be able to work as well as they do, having low expectations towards everything that occurs, somehow I just completely forgot to say that, like I do with every single video I record. Like a fundamental point gets missing. um, Lowering your expectations whenever you do something. There's going to be a sort of attachment you have towards the outcome of what you're doing without training it out of you. That generally, as we're doing things, we would like a certain thing to happen. We have a desire. And it's okay to have a desire for an outcome. It's okay to have a desire in general. But the attachment to that outcome, the attachment to that desire is where it becomes a problem. That by being attached, we also expect something, that we're expecting something in that attachment. And through expecting something, even if you get that thing, it's never going to be satisfying because you just received something that you thought was going to happen anyway, that you inherently expected to come your way. Whereas if what you got was entirely random, and you had no expectation of receiving it, it's a joyous surprise, that now you can be happy. You can be happy that you got, because you didn't think you would get anything that day. Um, I think a good example of this is if you get a lottery ticket. If you go to the lottery machine and you punch in your numbers and receive a ticket expecting to win the lottery, sure, you might be happy that you got the lottery, but more of what's going to be on your mind is, how do I get to spend this money? When am I going to spend this? What is that going to mean? And you're sort of enveloped by the desires surrounding that more than you are by the feeling of, oh my god, I just won the lottery. Whereas if you're walking down the street and you randomly find a lottery ticket in the back of your pocket, you're going to be ecstatic. It's a winning ticket. You just got all of this money, had no idea. So you have to always be, in my opinion, this is what works for me. Maybe it won't work for everybody, but after being disappointed enough times, I've learned that you have to get rid of your attachments, especially to the outcomes of your desires, and as a result of having done that, your expectations are going to be lowered, if not non-existent. And whenever you do get something that's good, that you do want, you're gonna enjoy it way more. It's gonna have way more meaning and significance. By far, the two biggest lessons I have ever learned in life, anywhere at all, are patience and prudence. And I'm not saying those two things simply because they rhyme well and I can put them in a one-liner in a video and have you go, oh wow, those two words sound so well together. Those two things are the single biggest things that I've learned through experience. And I've had a lot of confusing experience, a lot of pieces that I've had to pick up on my own and try and figure out what I can make of them. I was recently reading, or rather I'm reading through it at this moment, Permanent Record by Edward Snowden. And there's a part in the book where he talks about how the death of a parent, or parents dying, is what many would consider to be the moment that you become an adult. That adulthood, your development as a person, is all meeting its focal point the moment that a parent dies. But the comparison that he makes is between a parent dying and your image of a parent dying, the way that you would think of them, the idealized heroes that you might consider them to be, all come crashing down the moment that they have to get divorced, and that there are responsibilities that you now have to undertake as a result of your parents being divorced, and entire images of these people that are forever shattered, that are now replaced with a more nuanced view, that these are just human beings at the end of the day. They're not, the kind of people that the hierarchy that was enforced throughout your life would suggest they were, which is, something that tends to mark adulthood when they die, or at least later into your development. I don't entirely agree with the idea that the moment a parent dies is the moment that you become an adult, but that comparison he makes of the image of your parent dying and the new responsibilities that you have to undertake, that was something I could identify a lot with, because my parents throughout my childhood were always in between the idea of divorce. It was always a sort of when will it happen situation, because there were constant threats of the divorce occurring at some point, and then them separating and then moving back in with one another, separating and then moving back in with one another. It was always on the table all the time. There was always the sense that a divorce would happen at some point from a very young age. And because that constant sense was there, and because so many of these arguments I would end up mediating in a very inexperienced way, having to throw myself into the discussion to keep a sense of calmness, I had to improvise. I had to learn how I was going to position myself as a reasonable mediator when I had no idea what that consisted of or what that was. I had to figure it out on my own. And I think that's part of why it was so easy for me to be so arrogant about some of the beliefs that I held. If you listen to the Why I Do Things podcast, I talk about how I had such strongly held convictions at such a young age, and I think part of that, especially into the later years of my childhood, was due to the fact that my image of my parents was inherently skewed towards a more balanced, or as we say, nuanced direction. It was not these are people who I inherently look up to and who are just amazing, and that are role models for how I would govern my life. These are deeply flawed people with their own issues who I seem to get caught in the crossfire between, and who I want to know how to help somehow. I wasn't always successful at that, certainly not, but I tried, and it was that process of trying to lexically determine how is it that I can fit myself within the situation in a positive way. What things can I say that will diffuse this? I was constantly in my own head because I needed to be aware of everything I said or did and what effect it would have. I became hypersensitive to the nature of the things that I was saying. A lot of the time I just didn't care because I had my own emotional stuff going on, but I was very, very aware of their emotional states because I had to be. And so as I continued trying to be a mediator of sorts, and eventually observed the boiling point that their relationship would ultimately take, which culminated into them staying away from one another long term, and of course nowadays completely living apart for over a year now and whatnot. I mean, they've lived apart for spans of months, and I've lived with different ones, and you get that dynamic of one of the parents trying to almost trying to compete to see who can do a better job. I've had moments like that. It's all a strange dynamic, and it's for me specifically, it's been so contradictory because I've seen so many different waves of behavior from both of them, depending on the situation and the circumstances, that it was deeply confusing when I was younger. But when I got into my teenage years and my later teenage years, which of course I'm now, their later teenage years are now meeting their end because I'm 18 years old now, but as all that time went on, it progressed from this is a deeply confusing situation to be in, to these are just people with, problems, that these problems occur from this or that, and they're like everybody else, they're just people. I think people get so lost in the hierarchy of who they're talking to or who they're dealing with at a given moment that they forget that behind all of this social stratification, all of this abstraction, all of these groups that we would put people in, all of these categories that people would be put in, they're just people at the end of the day. Some people are further along than you. Some people have more experience in this or that area. Some people are going to know more, and you always have to be open to the people who know more, because you're not going to be able to know everything. Then that's one of the other lessons that I talk about of learning prudence, is that cautiousness, what cautiousness is the acknowledgement of what you can't know or what you do not know at that time. And through being cautious, you're not acting on assumptions that you know exactly what's going on at that specific moment, It's more like you're planning ahead for the things that could happen and not trying to go too far because of the things that might happen or that you don't know could happen. Like with patience, all that amounts to is more or less the same thing, that the moment that you're in now is not going to be permanent, and so you just have to wait for the moment when it is different. You have to change your conditions, yourself, the things around you, to match the outcome that you would like to have. And if those things don't work, you have to keep trying at it until you eventually get to that point. Time is going to be there nonetheless. You just have to use it to your advantage. And by sitting around thinking about all the time it will take, you're going to keep yourself from getting to the point that you're supposed to be in. It's going to be debilitating. Kind of like when someone procrastinates on a test for so long, and then they look at the fact that they only have enough time to study left to get like a C or a B, and because they can't get an A, they just decide to completely throw out the test. It's like, hey, hey, wait a minute there. You could have still gotten a passing grade. If you tried, you could have salvaged something out of it. Because the result isn't perfect, they let it all go. So you have to be constantly aware of the ways in which your mind tries to keep you from doing things. And that's part of patience. Patience is the willingness to sit around during dead air, to not get the desired result as soon as you would like, but to be willing to stick around long enough to eventually get it, to not throw the baby out with the bathwater or blow everything up in smoke. Time's not going to go anywhere. See, all of these things sound like cliches. That's the thing. I think in order to really understand why these things are so important, you have to have experiences where they are important. Like, anybody can tell you to be cautious and to think ahead. Anybody can tell you to be patient and work hard enough until you get to the thing that you want. But you don't truly realize that until you're forced to do those things, and then you see the result of those actions, and then you can apply it to things in the future that would, that would ultimately be beneficial to you. Or inversely, you've had so many negative experiences from having not done those things that they sort of act as a kick in the teeth to start improving yourself. But whatever the motivation is, whatever the cause for the effect, it's got to be there for you to really internalize that kind of advice. Because most advice that we're told commonly is generally true. Like, it's not that the advice is untrue. It's that the experiences you've had up to that point have been unable to validate the advice. The advice only really becomes real. It only really clicks in your mind once you've had experiences that allow it to be real. And so that's why I sound like a boomer to a lot of people, is because from early on in my life, I was sort of forced to grow up. I was forced to be in a situation where the people around me who I was supposed to not have a nuanced view on I had to have a nuanced view on them, you know? The people around me who were supposed to have a certain mysticism to them, I was unable to be given that in my childhood. It was just immediately, this is nuanced, this is complicated, let's try to figure this out. And then from that point onward, it was just a cascade of negative experience after negative experience, learning experience after learning experience, where I was forced to come to grips with the traditional advice that at one point or another I may have completely rejected and go, oh, this is retarded, or I would have looked at it and went, well, that's basically right, but how can I do it? Well, you got to be in a situation where you're forced to do it, you know? So it's all complicated, but I think generally people are going towards the same thing. It's just a matter of having the right experiences to allow you to do that. Ultimately, the experience you have is going to validate the advice. It's going to make you truly understand it. But the moment that you do understand it, it's immensely helpful. And I look at so many mistakes that I've made that I would have been able to avoid if I were just patient enough to see the thing through. So many mistakes I've made if I were just cautious enough. If I were just prudent enough in those events, then I would have avoided the mistake. And I mean, like, again, you can't idealize people. You can't have an assessment of someone that's anything other than the evidence that's given to you at that time. You have to try and look at everyone through an equal playing field, not as if they've all had the exact same experiences, but that all the experiences that they have are going to shape them in a different way. And as a result of that, you have to, you have to wait and see. You don't have a full understanding of everyone at all times. The situation is always going to be more complicated than you think. And so in order to truly conduct yourself with a sense of respect towards other people, you can't idealize or demean them. You have to look at them from the perspective of someone who does not know. And part of not knowing, part of realizing that you don't know, is being willing to be patient and being willing to be cautious or prudent. Because the ultimate results of those feelings of allowing yourself to act in the way of feeling those things is sort of based on the acknowledgement that you don't know, that there are things that you don't have the capacity to know at that time or haven't been exposed to, and that you're not going to make a rash judgment based on the information you have. You're going to let yourself continue working and experiencing until you're up to that point. And that sense of neutrality has been vital to me in diffusing a lot of tumultuous and otherwise dangerous situations. And I just wish I had the emotional stability when I was younger to realize that with the clarity that I do now. Because now it's almost like nothing can bother me, You can say just about anything to me and it won't faze me. I wasn't always like that. I always wanted to be like that. I thought if I just said I was like that enough times, I would become like that. And on some level that works for people, but you really have to have the lived experience for those things to internalize. And now I look at my own actions, and I can see those ideals that I just described within my actions on a day-to-day basis. And I think it's allowed me to be much more calm than I used to be.